All right, we're going to move on now to blood flow to our abdominopelvic organs. And there are a few quirky things we're going to have to keep in mind when we send blood to the abdominopelvic organs. This is going to involve learning some specific arteries that go to particular locations, and there are a couple little quirky things that go on that you'll have to keep in mind for if you're asked about blood drop tracings to those locations. Okay, so obviously any blood, oxygenated blood, that's going to head down to the abdominopelvic organs is going to travel down the descending part of the aorta, so it wraps around behind the heart, and then it passes through the diaphragm. There's an opening for it in the diaphragm. Once it's down in the abdominopelvic cavity, you can still call it the descending aorta because it's still descending, or you can also refer to it at that point as the abdominal aorta. Either way, it's the same thing. All right, so as you're heading down the descending aorta, and we'll see some of this on diagrams as well, you've got a few major exits that come off of the aorta. So if we're heading down, oops, I don't mean to write this in green. Let me erase that. Get over here, red. You're heading down your descending aorta. There is an exit that comes off, and that exit is called the celiac trunk. And a celiac is a term that can refer to a portion of the abdominal cavity. So when you see this word trunk with arteries, usually that's like a little short artery, like a tree trunk that's going to pretty quickly branch into, two or three other arteries. And so that's what happens with this one. So there's one branch that becomes the gastric artery, which that's going to wind up serving, guess what, the stomach. There's another branch that heads off to the spleen and provides oxygenated blood to the spleen. And then there's another branch that's going to head off this way over to the liver, and that's going to be called the hepatic artery. All right, that's one exit that you can take off the descending aorta. The next major exit is the superior mesenteric artery. The mesentery consists of sheets of tissue, like multiple layers of the serous membranes that line the abdominopelvic cavity, and it has some fat in there as well. And the mesentery contains arteries and veins that deliver blood and carry deoxygenated blood away from the intestinal tract. So the superior mesenteric artery serves the superior portions of this membrane to which the small and large intestine are attached. So that artery is going to serve or is going to provide oxygenated blood to quite a bit of the small and large intestine. All right, if you keep going down, we need to send some blood over to our kidneys, and left or right renal arteries will do that. Keep moving down. You have left and right gonadal arteries, which in a male, those are going to go to the testes. In a female, the gonadal arteries are going to head to the ovary. So they provide oxygenated blood to your primary sex organs, where sperm cells are made in males and egg cells are made in females. Then finally, our last major exit here for the abdominopelvic cavity, the inferior mesenteric artery, which supplies blood to the lower portion of the mesentery membrane on which your small and large intestine are attached. And so that's a smaller artery. It's going to bring oxygenated blood to lower portions of the intestines, primarily the lower portion of the colon and down into the rectum. All right, so here's a diagram from your textbook, which is showing some of these arteries I was just talking about. Let me change pen colors here. Okay, so here's the diaphragm here. So you see right in there, there's your descending, it looks like that showed up on my screen. There's your descending aorta poking through the diaphragm there. And shortly after it passes through the diaphragm, that's where you have the celiac trunk. So that's one of those arteries that you need to know. And then from there, that is going to divide up into 3 branches. All right, so here's one of them right here. That's called the gastric artery. And I know on your diagrams you're going to see left gastric artery. Don't worry about that. If you follow along the arterial diagrams, the arteries that serve the stomach eventually are connected to each other, and so don't worry about left versus right with the gastric artery. We're just going to refer to it as the gastric artery in general. You can kind of see here it circles back around. All right, and then another exit here off of the celiac trunk is this one, which is going behind the stomach, and it heads over here toward the spleen, which is over in your left upper quadrant, up in that left posterior upper portion of the abdominal cavity. So that's bringing oxygenated blood over there. And then the other branch over here, this is your hepatic artery, which is, you'll notice on the diagrams, you have the common hepatic artery, which can become the hepatic artery proper. You're going to have different branches that come off of that artery that go to the different sections of the liver, because the liver is a huge organ. You guys know it extends all the way from your right upper quadrant over here, wraps around, and it even extends over into a portion of the left upper quadrant. So that artery is going to have to divide up into several branches to bring oxygenated blood to the liver. Okay, so those are those 3 main branches that you see there off of the celiac trunk that you need to know. Okay, now if we keep going down, we said our next exit will be the superior mesenteric artery right in there. And again, that's going to bring oxygenated blood into the superior portions of the mesentery, which is a membrane type structure that's formed from multiple layers of the serous membranes of the abdominopelvic cavity. And your small and large intestine are anchored to that, and they receive their blood supply from that. All right, so you've got that one, and then just below that one, there's your right renal artery, there's your left renal artery that heads over to the kidneys. That's where the kidneys get their blood supply. And then you go below there, right here, and right here. Those are your gonadal arteries, and in a male you could call them the testicular arteries, and a female you could call them the ovarian arteries. Gonadal artery is fine. We don't usually specify genders on our blood drop tracings. Then finally, your last major exit that we're taking a look at here in our class is this one, the inferior mesenteric artery, which is going to supply oxygenated blood to a portion of the colon, especially the last sections of the colon. All right, and if you notice, the descending aorta keeps going on down, and it's going to divide up into 2 large arteries, the common iliac arteries, which you have a left and a right version of those, and those are going to carry blood on downward toward the legs, but we'll talk about those on a different video lecture. All right, now in terms of blood that is returning back to the heart through the venous system, we have some quirks that we have to learn about blood returning from the abdominal organs. The biggie is this one right in here. Okay, so blood that is draining off of your digestive organs and the spleen actually goes to the liver for processing and filtration before returning to the heart. That's important to keep in mind. The liver, as you guys will learn when we cover the digestive system a little bit later during the semester, processes nutrients, stores many nutrients, has a lot of responsibilities. You have macrophages in there that will hopefully intercept and kill microorganisms that might invade your body from the intestinal tract, from foods and water that you have consumed. So because of that, the liver has all these filtering jobs that it has to do on the blood. Blood that drains off of your digestive organs as well as the spleen actually goes to the liver first before it makes its way into the big giant vein that's going to carry it back to the right atrium. And of course, what is that big giant vein? That's going to be the inferior vena cava. All of your deoxygenated blood from the abdominopelvic cavity and lower is going to drain into the inferior vena cava as it makes its way back to the heart. Okay, so some things you got to keep in mind. Deoxygenated blood that is returning from the stomach is going to pass through the gastric vein. Deoxygenated blood coming back from the spleen will travel through the splenic vein or splenic vein. Then you have a superior mesenteric vein that contains deoxygenated blood that's draining off of most of the intestinal tract. Those three veins all connect into a special vein called the hepatic portal vein. Okay, and the hepatic portal vein takes this deoxygenated blood into the liver for filtration. Okay, so you've got all these cells in the liver, and their job is to take up various nutrients and process them. The liver's going to screen for microorganisms. It's also going to screen for old, worn-out red blood cells that the spleen may have missed. If you guys remember, that's one of the jobs of the spleen, to filter out old, worn-out red blood cells. So the liver's going to handle those types of things, and then this blood is still deoxygenated. It's going to send that blood onward from there into hepatic veins, which will then empty that blood into the inferior vena cava. Okay, and then, so here's that story right over here. Blood that's in the hepatic portal vein spreads throughout the liver. It goes through a system of smaller and smaller blood vessels, and eventually it winds up entering into sinusoid-type capillaries, if you guys remember learning about those on the capillary lecture over on the physiology side. And all those liver cells are going to process that blood. Then that blood gets sent into the hepatic veins. The hepatic veins send it into the inferior vena cava. And then it goes from there on back to the right atrium. Okay, now there is another little quirk there. The inferior mesenteric vein is also draining blood off of the intestinal tract, so that blood is going to need to go to the liver. The inferior mesenteric vein does not connect directly into the hepatic portal vein. It actually connects with the splenic vein, and then the splenic vein connects into the hepatic portal vein. So that's a little quirky thing with the return of the blood there that you just have to remember. One of those things you just got to commit to memory. Then we got a couple little quirky things with your gonadal veins. The left gonadal vein does not connect directly into the inferior vena cava. The right one does. The right gonadal vein carries deoxygenated blood from the right gonad, ovary or testis, directly into the inferior vena cava. The inferior vena cava is going to bring that to the right atrium. The left gonadal vein, in contrast, actually connects to the left renal vein. So blood that's returning from the left kidney merges with this blood that's draining from the left gonad. And then the left renal vein connects into the inferior vena cava. Keep in mind, too, your renal veins do not connect to the hepatic portal. Okay, and blood draining off of the gonads does not travel to the liver. It just goes into the inferior vena cava and makes its way back to the heart. Okay, and here's a diagram from your textbook, which is showing you some of this wiring with the various veins down in the abdominopelvic cavity. All right, so here's your hepatic portal vein over here, right in there. And so you can see that's going to be bringing deoxygenated blood up in here toward the liver. Now that's going to spread out. You can see there are lots of branches that come off of that hepatic portal vein to distribute that deoxygenated blood throughout the liver. All right, if you notice right in here, there's your gastric veins, and those connect into the hepatic portal. Here's your splenic vein running behind the stomach, and it connects into the hepatic portal. And here's your superior mesenteric vein. So that's a big vein connecting over there into the hepatic portal. And like I was just mentioning, here's your inferior mesenteric vein, which is connecting to the splenic vein. And then that blood's going to travel through the splenic vein and flow into your hepatic portal vein, as you can see there on the diagram. Okay, go away error message. And let me erase these little markings I made here. Now if you look carefully here on the diagram of the intestinal tract, you can see the portions of the intestinal tract that are served by the superior and inferior blood vessels. So the superior mesenteric vein is really going to serve most of the small intestines. The small intestines have been stripped off of this diagram. But then the superior mesenteric vein also serves over here the first portions of the colon, where you have this is the ascending colon, if you guys remember that from Biology 201, that first part of Biology 201. And then it's also going to serve portions of the transverse colon, which has been cut off, so we can see the underlying blood vessels. The inferior mesenteric vein over here, if you trace where these veins are coming from, that are connecting over here into the inferior mesenteric vein, it's draining, it's receiving deoxygenated blood from your descending colon. And then this portion is called the sigmoid colon. You'll learn that later when we cover the digestive system. And then finally from the rectum. So deoxygenated blood that's draining off of the rectum and the descending colon, those last stretches of the colon, will flow through the inferior mesenteric vein. The superior mesenteric vein is going to receive deoxygenated blood from most other parts of the intestinal tract. Okay, and here's a picture showing you, here's your left and right renal veins where they connect directly into the inferior vena cava. Then here's that left gonadal vein that's been cut off, but you can see it does not directly connect into the inferior vena cava. It connects with the left renal vein, and then that blood flows into the inferior vena cava over here on its way back to the heart. The right gonadal vein is right here, and it connects directly into the inferior vena cava to bring that blood back to the heart. So this diagram is showing you veins from the abdominopelvic organs that do not connect into the hepatic portal. The other ones that we talked about, that deoxygenated blood has to go through that hepatic portal vein so that the liver can filter the blood from that location. All right, we've got a practice activity we're going to do. I am going to bring up visible body just for a couple of minutes so you can see some of these blood vessels I've been talking about in 3D, which will give you a little bit better visual than those 2D diagrams from your textbook. All right, here we are in the abdominopelvic cavity. And of course, we've got lots going on here, but I am going to do multiple selects here. Let me strip off the liver for a second so we can see the underlying blood vessels here. And unfortunately, we cannot see the diaphragm that's been stripped off of this diagram. But I'm kind of zooming in here. This big giant red blood vessel there that you see, of course, that's the descending aorta. Oops, all right. And then right here, if I click that little short stubby thing that you see right there in light blue, that's your celiac trunk. Hopefully you can see that pretty well. All right, when I click on that artery, that is the left portion of the gastric artery. And of course, as I was telling you, just call it the gastric artery, that's fine. This portion over here is the right gastric artery. So you can see it actually just makes a circular shape. It's running along this inside curve of the stomach, and there are going to be smaller arteries that branch off of that and provide oxygenated blood to most of the wall of the stomach. And you can see it actually makes a little loop and connects back in over here. This is part of the hepatic artery. So let me deselect all of that. So that's another exit that comes off of that celiac trunk. There's the common hepatic artery. You can just refer to it as the hepatic artery, that's fine, because it's going to connect into, or it becomes the proper hepatic artery, and then it's going to start dividing up. So there's a left branch of the proper hepatic artery, so that's going to serve the left side of the liver. And if I keep rotating around over there, that portion of the proper hepatic artery is going to serve the right side of the liver. So the liver's a big organ, so oxygenated blood has to be spread out to many different areas. So the only thing you need to remember is that the hepatic artery branches off of the celiac trunk, and that's going to bring oxygenated blood out to the liver tissues. And keep in mind, this is different from what we're talking about with the hepatic portal vein. The hepatic portal vein is actually bringing deoxygenated blood that has picked up things like nutrients from the intestinal tract, from the foods that you've been digesting, and it's bringing those to the liver for processing. The liver is a very metabolically active organ, so it has to receive its own supply of oxygenated blood. It needs its own supply of that O2 for all of its cells, for their growth and metabolism that they have to perform. So that blood is being delivered through this artery. That's different from the hepatic portal vein, which is bringing deoxygenated blood that is drained off of other tissues over to the liver for processing. All right, and then there in light blue, I'm highlighting the splenic vein for you, and so you can see how that's actually running behind the stomach. We kind of rotate this around. Now we've got a back view in light blue right in there. There's your splenic artery that is running over here toward the spleen, and then it branches into multiple branches that head towards different portions of the spleen. Okay, that's that. Those particular exits off of the descending aorta. And let's see, I'm going to hide the stomach. I'm going to say goodbye to the stomach here. Hide that. What organ is this? Hopefully you guys remember, that's the pancreas. We're going to hide that. And so now you can see right in here, that big artery right there is the superior mesenteric artery. You can kind of see where it's headed there in light blue. I'm going the wrong way with my body organ here. All right, let me strip off, let me deselect all. Let me hide that portion of the small intestine. There in light blue, that's part of the superior mesenteric artery. That's a pretty big artery. And you can see all these little branches that are coming off of it. Those are superior mesenteric branches. And you've got some other ones over here that come off of that one and are supplying portions of the colon over here. And these are supplying portions of the majority of the small intestine being supplied by those arteries that you see. Those are all branches off of that superior mesenteric artery. All right, just so you could see that in a little bit more detail. All right, let me hide that. Come back up over here. I'm going the wrong way. We're going to hide that. Get rid of that. That is... Okay. So that's your superior mesenteric artery right there. Guess what that is? There's your left gonadal artery, and there's your right gonadal artery over there. So you can kind of get a 3D perspective on those. The renal arteries are not on this diagram. Looks like they have, oh wait, hang on. Here they are up here. Yeah, there's your left renal artery, and then your right one is over here behind. There's your inferior vena cava, that big blood vessel there. So you can see those also head off to the left and the right, and they divide up into multiple branches to bring oxygenated blood to the kidneys, and then the kidneys filter that blood. They filter the blood plasma and create the urine from remove the wastes from the blood and clean it up. And moving on down over here. Guess what artery this one is? That's your inferior mesenteric artery. And if we click on over here, some of these branches, those are smaller arteries that are going to wind up, not that one so much, but some of these guys over here and there. Those are all branches of the inferior mesenteric artery that are heading over here to supply oxygenated blood to, this is the descending colon, and then that descending colon wraps around, makes this little zigzag and becomes the rectum. And so the oxygenated blood for these portions of the colon and the rectum come from that inferior mesenteric artery. All right, so just wanted to show you guys those vessels here on visible body. And now let's take a look at the hepatic portal vein. I've got to move back up here in order to see that. It's going to be kind of hard to see because you've got so much of a gamish going on here with all these different arteries and veins. But right in there, there's your hepatic portal vein. And that would, remember I hid the liver. So the liver is up in here where you see this big wad of arteries and veins. So that's your hepatic portal vein, and it is receiving blood from this one. That's your splenic vein. This one right here, that's your superior mesenteric vein. And also from your gastric vein right in there. That's got a left and a right portion, but don't worry about left and right. It just makes a circle just like the gastric artery did. You know, all of those connect into the hepatic portal vein. And then remember the blood draining off that's passing through the inferior mesenteric vein. That one connects, that's it right here, and it connects over here into the splenic vein, and then the splenic vein merges into the hepatic portal vein. Okay, let me deselect all those. There's the hepatic portal vein, and then from there you can see how it's branching up into lots of additional branches, bringing that blood into different sections of the liver so that it can wind up being filtered and processed. And then that filtered blood enters into, let me deselect all of these again. After the blood has passed through the liver and has been filtered, it enters the hepatic veins. So there's a big hepatic vein there. There's one over here on the left-hand side. And there's yet another one back in there on the right-hand side of the liver. Everything you see there in light blue, those are veins that pull the filtered blood out of the liver and send it back over here to the inferior vena cava. And then as you can see there, the inferior vena cava is going to connect into the right atrium of the heart like we've been taking a look at when we were studying the heart. Okay, so let's do a practice with one of these abdominopelvic cavity blood drop traces. Supposedly you have one that says trace a drop of blood from the right atrium to the stomach and back. All right, so you're starting in the right atrium, so you're going to go through your pulmonary circuit. I'm not going to go through all that again. Keep practicing it. You're in the ascending aorta, okay? So then it's going to pass through the aortic arch, down the descending aorta. Now you can say descending aorta, abdominal aorta, that's fine, or you can just keep referring to it as the descending aorta. That's up to you and your preferences. All right, so if we're going to the stomach, then we know the stomach is served by the gastric artery, which really has a left portion and a right portion, but we're not going to worry about that. So the gastric artery comes off of the celiac trunk. So the celiac trunk is going to be the exit our blood drop is going to take off of the descending aorta. And from there it will enter the gastric artery. It's going to take some other little branches over to a particular portion of the stomach. We're not going to worry about those. So we'll just say stomach arterioles, stomach capillaries, stomach venules. Deoxygenated blood coming off of the wall of the stomach will enter the gastric vein. Eventually it's going to drain into there. Okay, this is coming off of a digestive organ, so it has to go to the liver for filtration. So the gastric vein connects to the hepatic portal vein. That brings it to the liver for filtration. That's all you need to write. After the blood gets filtered, it enters one of the major hepatic veins, or smaller hepatic veins that lead to bigger ones. And there are 3 large hepatic veins that connect into the inferior vena cava. And don't worry about, I'm not going to ask you about specific hepatic veins, just say hepatic veins in general. We haven't said exactly where in the liver our little blood drop is going. Those connect into the inferior vena cava, and then that's going to bring our blood drop back to the right atrium. So that's an example of one of these blood drop tracings that you would have with the abdominopelvic cavity. You just have to remember those little quirks that I described to you. You have to remember which ones connect into the hepatic portal vein to take blood to the liver for filtration before it winds up heading back to the inferior vena cava. The easiest thing to remember is that the renal veins connect directly into the inferior vena cava. The right gonadal vein connects directly into the inferior vena cava. Left gonadal vein connects into the left renal, which then connects into the inferior vena cava. And that's it for the abdominopelvic cavity. All of the other ones that we've learned about are going to bring that deoxygenated blood through this hepatic portal system before it winds up making its way back to the inferior vena cava. So just keep that in mind. I will be posting on Blackboard many different examples of blood drop tracings for you to practice with before you actually have to do a couple of these on your second exam for Unit 3. Let me know if you have any questions, and feel free to discuss these over on Piazza and the discussion boards. If you have any concerns or are confused about anything, make a post over there so we can discuss it.